Number one, the TMC letters are all bullshit. Okay. They just are. You have $1,100,000 in reward money. And if you Google it, you can make that tip anonymously and they're willing to pay in cash.
In today's new episode, we speak with old friend Matt Murphy, formerly of the Orange County District Attorney's Office, where he was a homicide prosecutor. He's also a true crime author, wrote a fantastic book called The Book of Murder, and you can find out more about that at thebookofmurder.com. In today's conversation with Matt, we speak about the mysterious abduction of Nancy Guthrie from her home near Tucson, Arizona on February 1st, 2026. So we hope you enjoy this episode here. Definitely check out Matt's book and let us know what you think on YouTube or Spotify. Thanks a lot for listening. We're going to break quick here for commercial. Don't forget to give us 5 stars and follow us on social media at Missing CSM. Welcome back to the podcast, Matt Murphy. How are you today?
Good. It's a very sunny but very cold day in New York City, the big wicked city, as they say. So I try to go outside, and in my California brain, I look outside and like everything's blooming. And I step out and it's like this wall, it's like a snow shovel hits me in the face, and the doormen laugh at me almost every day because I can't figure it out. So
No, I was thinking the same thing this morning because it was snowing yesterday. So to wake up and to see like the sun out, it was like deceptive. And then I went out to let the dog out and it's like, oh no, I still need my winter jacket. I still need that. I'm not.
Have you seen some of those videos on, I think on Instagram? I somehow wound up in my algorithm, and now that we're talking about it, it will definitely show up again.
Absolutely.
Of the dogs that like they open up, the owner opens it up and they take one step and they just nope right back inside. There's one with a bunch of ducks that do the same thing. They come out of a barn, they're like whack, whack, whack. Nope. And they all just turn right around. So I'm ready for summer. I don't know about you guys, but I'm done with this.
I'm done. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been covering the abduction of Nancy Guthrie over the past few weeks, and we've been trying to get as many people on who have been following it, who comment on it in such a responsible and thoroughly researched manner. And your name was on the list. And, you've been on the show a number of times. Everyone knows who you are. We're grateful that you enjoy coming on the show, or at least you pretend to.
I love the show, guys. I love your show. So,
awesome.
Yeah, happy to do it anytime.
Can you just give a quick background on yourself to remind listeners who we're speaking with today?
Sure. I was a DA for 26 years in Orange County, California. Orange County uses a vertical unit system, which is kind of important for today's discussion, I think. And what that means is for certain specialized units, for me, I came through sexual assault and into homicide, means you get assigned cities. That means that any murder that happened for 17 years when I was in the homicide unit, I'd get the call out. I would go in the middle of the night. I'd deal with all the warrants starting before they move the body most of the time. I work with the same detectives over and over again. And it's a really interesting thing for a prosecutor because you have a front row seat to the investigation starting inside that yellow tape. And then the idea is the lead detective will then be with you through the judicial process. So I'm there with them, shivering in the cold before we make entry for the nighttime judge, waiting for the warrant to get signed, all the way up to the sentencing, where that same lead detective will be sitting next to me when the jury comes in. And usually that process takes many years, as your viewers all know. And I would handle everything from deciding when there was enough evidence, who to charge, who to flip, who to make deals with, what charges to file. I would handle the arraignment, the bail hearing, all the way up through the jury trial, opening statements, the whole deal. And Orange County had a philosophy of one lawyer, one case. Even though we doubled up on a few, it was my responsibility to bring it home. So it was a great experience. I loved the job. I might learn slow, but I learned a lot during that time. And then I left the office in 2019. I took a job with ABC News doing legal commentary. I do a lot of stuff with 2020. I'm about to start a podcast of my own with Mark Geragos under the Megyn Kelly True Crime umbrella, which is cool. I wrote a book called The Book of Murder that basically I share what I learned about murders and murder cases and from the legal philosophy all the way to the nitty gritty of some of the more high profile cases that I did, which included I prosecuted the Golden State Killer case. I was the Orange County prosecutor on that. I did the dating game killer, Rodney Alcala. I did Tom and Jackie Hawk's case and a bunch of others. That's who I am. That's my background. And now I still have a legal practice, mostly defending police officers in LA, but I'm doing more and more true crime commentary because everybody's a lot nicer to me when I do this than when I walk into a courtroom. So walk into a courtroom, guys, there's at least one person every day. It dawned on me that there's somebody in that room that hates your guts, whether it's the defendant, if you're the prosecutor, the defendant's mom, somebody, maybe the judge is mad at you, opposing counsel, there's somebody hates you. And I walk into into a shoot for ABC News. Everybody's nice to me. Somebody wants to bring me coffee. Nobody brings you coffee in court. Anyway, I like this stuff. I like this stuff a lot, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. So that's who I am. Sorry for the long blathering intro.
No, very good. Very impressive background, and your book is phenomenal. And we got to ask about your next book. You mentioned that, I think the last time that you were on, that you were working on another one. How's that coming?
It's coming along. So it's due, the first manuscript is due to the editors on June 1st. So I'm busy as soon as we get off. I was writing all morning and I'm going to be writing all afternoon. But it's coming along. The idea on this one is last time I did an overview of murders in general. So I had talked about gang murders and murders for money and all that. I prosecuted 14 different serial killers in my 17 years in the homicide unit, and I only wrote about one in the last book. So the editors really like the idea of doing sort of the same thing, walking the reader through what I learned about serial killers in almost 2 decades of doing those cases. And so that's what we're doing, and it's coming together. And I've got I did some really, I think, fascinating cases that nobody's ever heard of before. And some cases garner media, as you guys know, and some don't. A lot of that depends sometimes on what they call elements, if you got a lot of video, maybe that's something that gets picked up, or you've got a particularly sympathetic victim, or there's something really twisted and interesting about it. Truth is, there's a lot of serial killers out there that nobody ever hears about. And so I'm going to write about some of those. And the behind the scenes, I think, is some of the most fascinating, underreported, undertalked about, how does a homicide prosecutor cross-examine the defense expert who's going to come in and say that he's a victim of abuse as a child, and it mitigates all of his crimes and he should get life instead of the death penalty, for example. So what happens behind the scenes on that? And I think the true crime audience, especially people that really enjoy it and are interested in it, I think everybody's ready for that. I think it's the next level, what actually happens, because catching the person is one thing, but the prosecution successfully, it's like, I heard a great analogy not too long ago. It's like climbing Mount Everest. Everybody seems so focused on getting to the top, right? And it's waving the flag around on the top and getting their pictures. Some of the most interesting stuff happens on the way down. And of course, if you die on the way down, nobody really cares if you summit it or not. So, and that's what criminal prosecution is. You catching the guy is one thing, but holding him accountable and achieving justice for the victim's family and for the community, that is in many ways even more important in my view, because it's what it's all about. It's achieving public safety and justice, not only for the individual crime, but for the community that you serve as a prosecutor. So So that's what the next one's about, and I think people like Lisa. I hope they do.
Yeah, well said. Looking forward to that. I wasn't going to ask this question because I wasn't sure what your answer to the previous question was going to be, but this kind of popped into my mind. And we will talk about Nancy Guthrie right after this, but I couldn't resist asking this question. You said all of the background stuff when going into these investigations that was going to be super interesting, and I've always wondered, like, how does a series of crime get labeled as connected and part of a serial killing spree or part of a serial killer? Like, is that something that people within law enforcement are hesitant to say? Like, does the word serial killer come up often? Like, does a cop just go, this could be a serial killer, guys? Or do I just watch too much, like, you know, television shows about?
So, it's a great question, right? So serial killer is an academic term. It's coined by the FBI in the 1970s. It's not a legal term. Legal term is multiple murder. So you don't have to prove somebody's a serial killer. I've seen that TV show too. I've enjoyed that TV show too, whatever it is, I think we got a serial killer on our hands. And the dramatic moment in that is very real but it's real in pretty much any murder. The distinction, of course, with a serial murderer, is that they're guaranteed to do it again. Guaranteed to do it again, as are all sex offenders, guys. If you got a real predatory sex offender, whether they advance to the actual killing part or not, they're a child molester, as we call it, or a serial rapist, that is in effect the same dude. It is just one gets off on the murder part and one gets off, the terror of inflicting the sadistic pain is enough. They're almost all sexually motivated. There are, of course, dramatic exceptions to that, but the vast majority, the Bundys, the Alcalas, the Dahmers, those are all sexual crimes. And one of the things I talk about in my book, but I'm going more heavily into in the second one, is there was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud named Dr. von Krafft-Ebing, who was a German psychiatrist in the 1880s. And he wrote a fascinating book called Psychopathia Sexualis. He tries to tackle, it's ambitious, he tries to tackle essentially all sexual deviancy. And he talks about all of it. And it all hasn't survived the test of time. Like he says, product of his time, being gay is a sexual deviancy. Of course, we don't, it's not, and we don't look at it that way. But other parts of it, I think, are way ahead of his time. And in certain respects, I still don't think we've caught up. Like for serial killers, he didn't use that term. He called them sadistic lust murders. And I think he was spot on there. I think that somehow we've lost our way. And like the FBI definition is of serial murder is one individual commits two or more murders at different events, and that's it. And of course, that includes drug dealers who are in the game long enough who can shoot straight, or mafia hitmen, or gang members. And the psychology of those guys, well, they're all psychopaths probably. It's totally different than that sexually motivated psychosexual predator that, the Bundys, the real boogeymen that we have to worry about. Or most recently, I heard he's changing his plea today, Rex Heuermann, which I think is a fascinating modern example of the serial killer. So it's a thing, but it's not a thing, if that makes sense. So I've never seen a cop go, I think we got a serial killer on our hands. But what you do is with modern forensic evidence, a lot of those are linked, of course, with DNA, especially when you're talking about a sexually motivated killing, because you're going to get what's known as sperm fraction nuclear DNA. And that's the super awesome, complete genome with, I think, 23 separate loci that they can check, which is how we get into those incredible numbers of made up numbers like octillions and things like that, that it's, and they'll never say it's a match. They'll say the suspect can't be eliminated because the 1 in a 17 octillion chance that somebody else could share those same genetic markers is scientifically real, but it's not in reality, it's not real. And as a prosecutor, you get to say it's a friggin' match. And of course it is when you get into DNA. So that's how they link a lot of them now. That's how they linked a lot of the old cases with Rex Heuermann. But one of the challenges is when you got a body that's badly decomposed, or you've got somebody that is a body that's been scavenged, as we call it in Southern California, somebody that's dumped in the chaparral, or you got a skeleton that's found in a grave somewhere. You're just not going to get that nuclear DNA. And there's a lot of those cases. There's a million that you just know the guy did. You just don't want to compromise the integrity of your prosecution. When you got 3 or 4 that you can prove, you charge the 3 or 4, and you can clear the other ones on a detective's desk maybe, but you don't contaminate your case by reaching for the moon, and it doesn't add anything. It's incredibly important to prosecute people for cases that you can prove, including extraditing them from other states, because you want to bring justice to their family, and there should be no free murders. But with a lot of serial killers, you just know they committed way more than they were charged with.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Let's pivot to Nancy Guthrie's abduction. And I'm curious, have you worked cases like this where it's like a home invasion and I guess it's a kidnapping?
This is a unique fact pattern. I guess unique is too strong a word. It's a very rare fact pattern. And I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like this with the Ring camera and the guy with the balaclava mask on there. But I've worked a bunch of cases with FBI task forces, with abductions. The Samantha Runyon case that some people might recognize, that was mine, with a missing 6-year-old girl that was abducted from the front of her home, and she's playing with her little friend. It was done by a guy named Alejandro Avila. She was raped and murdered. She was found about a week later at a place called Ortega Canyon. I've worked a bunch of FBI task forces with fugitives. So I've worked task forces. The Golden State Killer, there was multiple task forces on that. Joseph D'Angelo, and as I mentioned, that was one of my cases. So I've certainly worked the task forces. I've done abductions. I've done sexually motivated abductions. I've done kidnappings for ransom. I've done all of those. I've never seen this exact fact pattern when an elderly woman is taken from her home. I've done 5 no-body murder cases where the person disappears. This is, in my mind, absolutely a murder case, as sad as that is to say. I personally think she was dead in her house, based on the blood pattern that we saw. But I also look at these through a pretty jaundiced lens of 17 years of murder cases and 4 years of sex cases before that. So I'm one of the interesting things, guys, that you learn working cases like this is that you have to keep an open mind. And especially when you have missing people, and I've worked a bunch, you will oftentimes walk into a scene where you think it's one thing, and you learn very quickly that that initial impression is often wrong. And you don't know what it is until you know what it is. In other words, until they got somebody in custody in this case, this Chris Nanos guy, the sheriff, keeps talking about, well, we eliminated that guy. Okay, first of all, the sheriff doesn't eliminate anybody. That's the prosecution's job to do that. And when you don't know what it is, you can't eliminate a single person on the planet Earth, really. You can systematically go through it and accumulate evidence that strongly indicates it had nothing to do with it, but you got to keep an open mind because you don't know. And I had a case, Daniel Wozniak. That was a beautiful young woman that was found in a man's apartment who the scene was staged to look like the occupant, a guy named Sam Herr, who was a war hero from Afghanistan. And they're all college students at a local community college. It was staged to look like he murdered her. There was a note. There was all kinds of stuff left for us to indicate that he'd committed this murder. And I walk in and I'm like, well, this is obvious. It's some lover's quarrel between the two of them, which looks like the majority of murder cases that you go into in Orange County. When you go to a scene, chances are you get that call in the middle of the night. You're walking into somebody's house and they were murdered by their spouse. That's just the vast majority of murder cases that you do in the homicide unit. And it looked just like one of those. And to the credit of my detectives, they're like, no, something's wrong. Something's wrong. And I'm like, come on, guys. And this is embarrassing to say, but they were absolutely right. And the killer, what he'd done is he'd murdered the occupant, the war hero. He murdered him, cut off his head and hands to get his ATM card because the guy had combat pay from Afghanistan, and the killer was a low-life loser, community theater actor who saw an easy way to pay his rent. And it was literally that simple. He put together this diabolical plan to murder one person to get at his money and then murder somebody else to throw the detectives off the scent. And it was, I wrote about it in my first book. It was absolutely horrible, but it stands as an example in my mind of you have to keep an open mind. And the Tom and Jackie Hawks in out of Newport Beach, that was the couple that was tied to the anchor and thrown off their yacht. Really similar. Skylar De Leon was the mastermind of that. And he was the most accomplished, most psychopathic liar I ever encountered in my entire legal career. And I monitored his interview, and I'm watching this guy tell a absolutely crazy story that was so out there, it was halfway convincing. And again, same thing. I'm going, well, hey, that kind of makes sense, dummy that I am. And my detectives are like, don't be a fool. There's more to it. And they were absolutely right. And turned out that this guy that showed up, he gave his interview with a baby on his lap. Okay. And I was falling for it. And my grizzled, experienced detectives figured it out, and turns out he murdered them, and did a completely different murder 10 months earlier down in Mexico that we also wound up prosecuting. So that's one of the things when you see a sheriff like Chris Nanos come out and go, that person's eliminated. I don't know what he's talking about on that. And it's at this point I'm really frustrated with what I've seen from that sheriff. And by the way, on one of my Newport Beach murder cases, we worked very closely with the Pima County Sheriff's Department back in like 2005, 2006 era, and they were absolutely top notch. They were steely-eyed professionals all the way. And I don't know what happened to Pima County because that's not what we've seen in this investigation.
Could it have been the spotlight that was put on them at the time and kind of, I don't know, causing them to make bad decisions and feeling like they were too under the radar or too under the microscope?
I've been on that stage, when reporters are firing tough questions out there. I've been at the microphone after the trial's done. But I've been on that stage with elected officials. And you have to expect that, especially when you bring the media in, which Chris Nanos did. Let's not forget, he kind of brought the thunder down, which I have no problem with. Like, appealing to the public for help is a totally legitimate tool when you need it. Okay. One of the things I've got a problem with, though, is that when it wasn't solved and when they started making, and look, I want to be fair. It's a tough job. And I really do. I want to be fair, but I'll share a story with you guys. Elizabeth Vargas, who is a real professional journalist. I mean, she's the real deal. She's at News Nation, and I've known her for years. And I think I've gotten to know her personally. She's a wonderful human being, and she is a real professional. She did her entire career. She's the real deal. And he agreed to go on her show. And she asked him, this is after the gloves were found on the side of the road. Remember that, right? Which was, for anybody that's done murder cases, every single prosecutor and homicide detective in the country was kind of like rolling their eyes at that one, because everybody knows when you do a big enough canvas or a large enough surf, you always find gloves. There's always a gardener's glove. There's always a workman's glove. You always find gloves. In fact, I walked through Central Park in New York today. There's gloves all over the place. Okay, like you walk along, workman's gloves, mittens. People lose gloves. I've got a closet full of one glove that with its missing mate because we lose gloves all the time. And one of the questions she asked him was, and here's a shocker: who could have ever imagined that a professional journalist is going to throw this one out there? Hey, did you find Nancy Guthrie's DNA on those gloves? Shocker. And he did not know the answer to that. And then instead of saying either I don't know or even I can't comment on that because it's a pending investigation, which I've got no problem with at all, he pushed back and said, you people in the media, and he turned into a gigantic dick, for lack of a better term, and pushed back on her, and she did nothing wrong. And she invited him on the show. He said yes, and that's not a gotcha. That's a legitimate, fair question, and he couldn't anticipate that coming. That's amateur hour. to answer the question, yeah, look, it's scary when those cameras pop up, especially when you're inexperienced, which Chris Nanos has absolutely demonstrated that he is. Supposedly a 40-year career in law enforcement, great. That guy has never worked a vertical homicide case in his friggin' life, or he wouldn't be behaving like that. Like, or at the very least, he would be answering that question, in a professional manner instead of trying to blame the journalist for asking that, right? So yeah, it increases the pressure, but he invited the cameras in there because he appealed for the public help. And that, it's, as they say, if you're in the NFL, you got to act like you've been in the end zone before, right? And that is, you got to anticipate that, and that's a fair question. And so the answer in a really long, probably boring way is no. I don't give them that. And another thing is that they returned that crime scene in 30 hours. What in God's name are they doing? And that just reflects a fundamental lack of experience in this kind of thing. And I don't know what happened to the pros that I dealt with in our murder case, because they were great. And I don't know Chris Nanos. Outside of that one case I worked with them, I have no idea the politics in Pima County. But that was a fail. And then you stack on, and I don't know, and maybe they're wrong, but I've read a lot of things about conflict with the FBI. The FBI apparently wanted to use the Quantico crime lab, which is the best in the world, guys. And the feds have resources that local law enforcement does not have. Like, for example, they can do these things called administrative drop warrants, where they can get cell phone records inside of 24 hours. You can't do that at the state level. In California, you need a full-blown search warrant to get into cell phone records. That's California law, which means you got to write a warrant, you got to take it to a judge, you got to serve a warrant, and then you've got to go wait about 2 weeks for Verizon or T-Mobile or whoever to go through their process and produce the records. And then a lot of times it goes through the court. It's a completely different process. The feds are a weapon to use when you have a case like this. And when it comes to abductions, they should have been contacted immediately. They should have been brought in. And I can tell you from personal experience, the women and men, the field agents who work those cases are some of the smartest, most dedicated people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And I've done numerous task force investigations with them, and they're the best. And the idea that you're butting heads with the FBI within the first week should be unacceptable to the people that work for that department, and it should be, in the end, unacceptable to the voters of Pima County, if it's true. And I want to be fair. I've read about it. I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody personally that's been involved in the investigation. So
we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
So where, in your opinion, is this investigation at now then? As we've kind of gone over, it wasn't handled great. They did rule out the Guthrie family, and I'm not exactly sure who ruled them out. I'm guessing sheriff did and not the prosecutor.
I don't know what that means. Honestly, guys, I really don't know what that means. Like, ruled out, we understand it in the parlance, a conversation here, but in the context of a murder investigation, when you don't know who did it and you don't know why, how can you rule somebody out? And I'm not for 1 second suggesting that the Guthrie family had anything to do with it, but I don't understand how you're eliminating people when you don't know. I mean, you can have a suspicion, you can have a strong suspicion that this person had nothing to do with it, but to take to the cameras and officially, quote unquote, rule somebody out or, quote, eliminate them as a suspect, that speaks to the inexperience, I think, that we're seeing here, because you have to have an open mind to all possibilities. And the problem with saying that person had nothing to do with it, whoever they are, barber down the street, janitor, family member, whoever it is, you are foreclosing, avenues of potential investigation. If it's like, well, hey, I've got a neighbor who says that the gardener down the street might have had something to do with it. No, we've already ruled him out. Let's devote our resources elsewhere. And you can see how that can become a real problem. I don't know what it means. Now, but let me mention this. Right now, the sheriff is getting all the heat, but I'll tell you, the top law enforcement official in Pima County is a woman named Laura Conover. That's the DA, and I don't know where she has been in this. Now, in the way vertical units work, like we talked about, is you marry the people that are going up to the top of Mount Everest along with the people that are getting you back down again. You put the prosecutor together with the lead detective, and a prosecutor who's embedded in that investigation can see things from the perspective of justice and conforming with the constitutional rights of a criminal suspect somewhere down the line. And that's critical for fairness, but it's really critical for achieving justice, because if you make a mistake because you don't have a prosecutor involved on a case like this, you could blow the entire case. You could blow the prosecution. And I'll give you an example. It's like you get an enthusiastic, inexperienced police officer who kicks a door in without getting a warrant, for example. And lo and behold, it's a jackpot, and you find all the evidence you need. Guess what? That person's going to get away with the crime they committed because there was no corresponding search warrant. There are 1,000 ways that a sheriff's investigation can destroy a successful prosecution. You know, putting handcuffs on somebody is nothing if they did it, if they're not then held accountable for what they did. And when you see, and look, and again, I wasn't in the house. I don't know what they found inside the house. There's a lot that I do not know. So again, I want to be fair. And this is just my opinion here. But when I'm watching news reports of Bearcats, those tactical vehicles going out, and SWAT teams to arrest Uber Eats drivers that have nothing to do with the case, apparently, and I don't know if it's true or not, but that guy's mother came out and said they searched our house without a warrant. And now she may not know, but that's what she said. That's what's out there. If that is true, thank God that guy had nothing to do with it, because if that happened, that is performative. That's somebody that is trying to look good. That's not on Chris Nanos, guys. That's on the DA. And again, maybe she's behind the scenes. Maybe she's personally in there reviewing all the warrants. She's not, I don't think, but we certainly haven't seen any evidence of that. But that's on the DA. That's on an equal failure. It's like that beginning of Law and Order, right? There are two equally important parts: the investigation and the prosecution. She has been a ghost, and I think I think that's way more disturbing. And then again, I wanted to be fair, so I did a little bit of research, and people need to do their own here. And I don't know if it's true, but according to ChatGPT, that woman has never personally prosecuted a homicide case in her entire legal career. She's a career defense attorney. And I think that this is a failure, in my opinion, both of Chris Nanos and Laura Conover. And leadership matters, experience matters. And when you have two people at the top who, sorry, in my opinion, don't know what they're doing, this is what happens. You don't have arrests. You don't have competent investigations. You have crime scenes that are returned 30 hours later. And the DA absolutely should have been on that, saying we will maintain the integrity of this scene until it has been thoroughly processed by everybody. She lived there alone. What was the purpose of returning that house? And we've seen video of reporters stepping on the freaking blood, less than 48 hours after Nancy Guthrie went missing. That is inexcusable. That's the DA and the sheriff. It's maddening to me. The guy, and just to share this with you, the man that I worked for almost my entire 17 years in the homicide unit was a man named Tony Rukakis. He came up through the ranks as a prosecutor. He was in the homicide unit. He had done those cases. Then he went on to become a Superior Court judge, where he tried murder cases as a judicial officer, and then he became the DA. So when we had a case like this, and I would go in and report to my boss's boss's boss, the elected official, I was sitting across a desk from a guy who had done it before, who understood it, and knew that his job was to provide all the resources he could to me and my team to give us all the help he could and get out of the way so that we could put the case together. I have no idea what this woman is doing. All I know is that she's never done it. She's never prosecuted a murder case in her entire career, if ChatGPT is right. And that is a real problem in my eyes.
Now, if we could shift a little bit to the actual abduction or the theoretical murder, maybe accidental murder during the abduction of Nancy Guthrie, what is now the motivation of the people who are responsible? And what was the motivation of them in the hypothetical that they went to abduct her, she had a medical emergency and died, and then they realized what they had on their hands? The letters to TMZ, there's a new one that came out, I think yesterday, a new ransom demand or request. Are these real, or are the actual perpetrators, did they dispose of the body in this hypothetical and now they're just gone? And then all these other, I don't know if you call them copycats, but the people who want the publicity are taking advantage of it?
So number one, the TMC letters are all bullshit. Okay. They just are. You have $1,100,000 in reward money. And if you Google it, you can make that tip anonymously, and they're willing to pay in cash. Okay. So just off the top, common sense wise, who in their right mind is going to want a $70,000 Bitcoin when they can get $1.1 million? Like that makes no sense on its face. Another thing is when you look at the tone and the way it's written, it is like part of my practice, guys, since I went into private practice, is I've been hired as a fixer a couple of times for people that have been caught up in these scams. And I don't know how many of those text messages you guys get a day on, you must pay your ticket, or, go to the DMV, scammersrus.com website. It's just ubiquitous in our society, right? All of those things are fake. Maybe at the very beginning, maybe one of those was real. I don't know. The FBI, again, best in the world, in my opinion, at sorting that out. And they're not taking those things seriously, and for very good reason. The TMZ ones are patently ridiculous. Like, hey, I could get 1.1 million, but all I want is half a Bitcoin. What do you have to lose? Those people are the biggest parasitic scumbags. In a way, they're even worse than the killers here, because they are taking advantage cynically with the apoplectic grief of a family who has lost their mom. There's no hell deep and dark enough for them, in my personal view. They're the scum of the friggin' earth. And I really hope that the FBI, somewhere behind the scenes, is spending some resources trying to find them. They found one in Hawthorne, California. I don't think there's a sentence big enough in my mind for those people, because they are attempting to cash in on the grief of a family that is really suffering. And I'm my heart breaks for the entire Guthrie family, all of them. So no, those aren't real. I think that one of the hypotheticals that she was kidnapped for ransom and died, that's a possibility. I think when you look at the video, I think there's a tarp in that backpack, which means they were planning on moving her out at the very beginning, right? But it could be anything. This, and again, jaded lens here. Typically when a lot of people right at the very beginning of this immediately discounted the potential that this was a sexual assault related thing, that this could have been a sex offender because of her age. And I hate to say it, but you don't age out of sexual assault. You just don't. The very, very first case I worked on as a junior law clerk in the Writs and Appeals Unit of the Orange County DA's office in the summer of 1992 was a 78-year-old Jehovah's Witness who was brutally raped inside of her home and later died. So it could be that. Again, we have to maintain an open mind. I would be able to speculate, I think, with a lot more accuracy if I could see the photos from the inside of the house. And so we're kind of reading tea leaves here. But the sheriff originally came out and said she was abducted from her bed, right? And then, like everything else that Chris Nano says, he then backed off on that, right? And then Savannah Guthrie later came out and said something very similar, that she was taken from her bed, which indicates to me that there was either blood on the bed or some indication of that she was actually pulled out of her bed. Another thing that seems to support that is he didn't knock on that door. He was trying to cover the camera. At least we didn't see that, or they destroyed the camera ahead of time. And speaking of cameras, remember the clips of them on the roof? They discovered a camera like a week later. Again, guys, that's just friggin' inexcusable. That's amateur hour. Experienced homicide investigators, one of the very first things they're going to look for is cameras, and they're going to look very closely for that. And by the way, kudos to the FBI. FBI is the one that got those images, and they were able to do that. And also, I got to tip my hat to, I think it was Google that monitored the cameras that were involved in this, and they were able to find what they call metadata, even though she didn't have a subscription. That's really, really good forensic work that is to be commended, because without those images, we wouldn't even know that. But we have to have an open mind about it. Could be a sexual assault. It's likely financially related. I'll give them that. But again, I've been wrong before, and we have to have an open mind. It could be the discharge of a debt. Maybe somebody owed her money. You hit a roadblock on almost every theory, right? Because sexual assault, usually that takes place in the home, and then they leave. This person clearly had a plan to abduct her. That doesn't mean it's not a sex case. Doesn't mean it's not a serial killer. It could be either one of those. So I want to practice what I preach here and keep an open mind as to everything that it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, we really appreciate your time here. If we have just enough time for one more, I just want to get your take on, you mentioned the video of the assailant. Like, what are your observations of his behavior?
Well, that's the boogeyman right there, right? My first thoughts on that, when you look at the gloves and you look at the pistol, which is a 22, and that either indicates, again, amateur hour by him, or perhaps it's just to get compliance, which he doesn't really need with a woman that old. But maybe that's all about. Or 22 long rifles also they're quieter than virtually any other firearm. So maybe that's more professional. So again, it could be a lot of different things. I've heard speculation that it appears to be a walkie-talkie in his pocket with the antenna. That's very interesting. That obviously would indicate that he's communicating with somebody else. But hey, we had a famous case in California where there's a guy that was abducting people, and he came in and he was doing that to fake out his victim. He was doing it alone, but he made it seem like, and he came in all tactical gear. And that was a very famous case where one county they thought it was the husband who did it, and they really braced him hard on an interview. And then he did the same thing in another county, and it took that detective about one day to put the whole thing together. And that was one individual. So again, we've got to have an open mind. But I see that guy, and that is the boogeyman. My first thoughts, honestly, was there's no way it's his first rodeo, and I'll bet you anything, and I stand by this one until I hear different, that guy has been in the Pima County Jail before. I would not be at all surprised if that guy is a known figure that has learned a couple of lessons and put that mask on. And again, blind speculation by me. That's when you see the gloves and you see the balaclava and the backpack. He came in. I mean, backpack screams rape kit to me, but I don't know, and we don't know what the DNA, where the DNA was recovered from inside. So there's so much we don't know. And shouldn't know, in a pending investigation. But I think this case will eventually be solved, guys. I think these questions will eventually be answered. I think that it will be years. And tragically, look, the no body cases in Southern California, as a general rule, if they get a body out into the Pacific Ocean or they get a body out into a shallow grave in the desert, we don't find them. Now, that does not mean that that you can't prosecute a case like that. I've prosecuted 5 no body cases, including 3 where our victims are somewhere out in that same desert, Arizona and California. There's a borderline that we drew on a map, but it's the same desert, and we don't find those. Now, the one person that has never prosecuted a no body case, again, is Laura Conover. So whether I have any faith in her office to actually do it if they amass evidence against somebody, we'll have to see. I hope so. But I'm, as you can tell, I'm down on her, and I'm down on Nanos at this point. So it'll eventually be solved, but I think it's going to take years. And I don't think, unless somebody talks, I don't think we're ever going to see a body in this case.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I mean, we started this by saying that we've been covering Nancy Guthrie's abduction, and we always try to have people on who can give that type of perspective, all types of perspectives. And we love the fact that you can come on and give your opinion, say that it's your opinion, say you could be wrong, because that's the way to maturely handle this. But you know what? With your experience, I mean, odds are it's probably going to play out in some form, the way you think it's going to play out. And we super appreciate you coming on to give us that insight.
Yeah, you bet. And let me say this last thing. I pray to God I'm wrong on everything. I hope I hope this DA is working diligently behind the scenes. I hope Kristen Anos is way more competent than what it appears to me. And I pray to God that Nancy Guthrie is found alive and we can bring a close to this. I hope, I pray I'm wrong on all of it.